Market update, August 14th, 2020. Well, let's get into the economic indicators for this week. We've got unemployment, Fed decisions, interest rates, housing, inflation, and stock market indexes. Hey, for those of you that joined me back in February, you know that I built out an economic timeline, and during that timeline, I created different algorithms, what's called an economic map. And as you also know that we're about 80% on target, which was my original goal back in February for what we actually mapped out. Now, the only change that I made in this economic mapping is I included two different what-if scenarios, taxes under Trump and taxes under Biden. And so now let's take a look at where we stand. Here we are, we're closing in on the end of the first year of 2020, and now we're moving into phase two, the election and the vaccine, which we're going to cover today. Phase three is going to go towards the end of the year, and it will happen after the election, and what the and we'll experience a lot of volatility based upon, it could be up volatility, down volatility, based upon who wins that actual election. So let's get into the virus. And we can see now there's a little heat map of where the virus is concentrated on. It's obviously in the most populated areas, which does have an effect on where people live. And we'll also talk about the virus vaccine update. As you know, I've been keeping up to date on who and when the virus vaccine is going to be released because, as I've been saying, the economy is the vaccine. So right now we have 2 companies approved for limited use, 8 companies in phase 3, which is the final test, and 11 companies in phase 2 and 20 in phase 1. We've reduced from 140 just in a few weeks down to 135 companies in preclinical trials. And the leaders are Pfizer. They hope to have a vaccine by the end of the year. They've contracted with the U.S. government for up to 300 million vaccine doses. We've also got front runners at Oxford, Serum, Novavax today, agreement to provide 60 million vaccines for the UK, and Moderna. Unemployment, well, first time that we've gone below 1 million since March 23rd of 2020. We hit 363 million unemployment applications last week, reducing the unemployment from last week's 11.1 down to 10.1 and from a high of April at 14.7%. Well, the current discussions in Congress, well, we've got an executive action, initially $400 a week, but reduced to $300 and may be changed based upon congressional negotiations. Also, my projections are that unemployment will reduce down to 9% by the end of the year and 6% by the end of 2021. I do have some breaking news here just about 5 minutes ago, which it looks like Trump has instructed Mnuchin to send out checks for $3,400. Again, I don't know how relevant this is or if this is just a ploy to get Congress back in to make a final decision. But we are seeing some push towards that. That just came up. That's just recent news. All right, economic indicators. Well, not much has changed on this front. We've got Fed rates at 0 to 0.25, money markets at 0.15 to 0.25, and average CD rates not much moving, about 0.5% to 0.75 for 1 year. And it's a little bit less than the actual high-yield money markets. But again, we don't have the FDIC on all high-yield money markets, where you do have up to the 100,000 to 250 respectively on the CDs. Mortgage rates, not much has changed on a 10-1 ARM. You're down to 2.7%. But be careful of this penalty that's coming up for refinancing, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. We also have retail sales post first-time gains since pandemic at 1.2%. Now, last week I talked about this, that, hey, we had a August 8th deadline date, or a D-Day, and we talked about McConnell saying, hey, the Congress is going to go on vacation until there's a deal. Well, boy, was he wrong. Congress went on vacation and without a relief package. There's no PPP. The unemployment was only done by executive action, and they're still not expecting a payment until mid-September, which is really sad because, you know, I've been watching some of the news about some of these families that are suffering, and all I got to say is, Congress, come on. It should not be about politics. It should not be about bailing your bankrupt state out. It should be about helping the American people that need it the most during this pandemic. Sad. It's really sad. By executive order, we also have eviction deferments and a stimulus expected by September. Well, the forbearance risk is still on the horizon at over 8.5 million mortgages that have not been paid, and 2 in 5 tenants are due for evictions. Again, the eviction expired on July 31st in 30 states. Now, just because there's an executive action from Washington to defer evictions a little bit longer, each state can then override and make that longer based upon that state. So we have a lapse in unemployment insurance. Again, we don't have a guarantee of what it's going to be. This is just an executive order, but it's not actually being put into place yet. And we have 40 million renters at risk. At the beginning of today's broadcast, I did talk about the economic mapping. And again, that is right on line with where I mapped out back in February of 2020. Housing prices wasn't much of a surprise when housing went up, when people started getting back to the normalities of life. I don't even know if that is correct right now. Nobody's really back to normal. Still wearing masks everywhere you go, and but because of that shortage in supply and demand, housing prices increased by 4.1% in June alone. Again, that's because low inventory and low interest rates. Not a lot of people are listing their houses, except if you live in New York City. Breaking news this morning, 87,000 listings in New York. Again, it's what we originally talked about back in February, March, that when this pandemic started to hit, we would see people leaving the congested areas. Look, we saw this in 9/11. When the terrorists hit New York City, there was a lot of people said, where will the next terrorist attack be? It'll probably be in some populated area. And we had to move back to suburbs and to rural areas. And we see this again now. The virus is most concentrated in those congested areas. And now we're seeing bidding wars again on suburban and rural area homes. Again, this will change when all of this forbearance comes home to roost in March or April of 2021. So again, this is not something that is a surprise. This was all built out in the economic map. Economic indicators with inflation, well, the Fed Powell says that their goal originally was 2%. It's always been their goal to keep inflation at no greater than 2%, and they will adjust interest rates and monetary flow based on that. Right now, he said that everything's off the table. They're not going to try to cap inflation at all. So we see some categories that have gone up: housing, food, clothing, footwear, restaurants. And a lot of that has to do with how we are changing as a society when we get out of this pandemic. Well, the stock market really is just going to hinge on the next round of stimulus. And it's going to be based upon what the unemployment is, what the PPP is, what the stimulus amount is. We know now that there's been an executive order to defer starting September 1st, FICA taxes or Social Security. But again, that's a lofty goal. I know that's what was signed into executive order, but I don't think that the consequences of saying, hey, we're going to do this in 2 weeks. You have payroll companies that have coded systems. You have smaller businesses that don't have payroll companies. How are they going to follow all these new rules and regulations and allow a deferment? And then what is the payback? Then no one has mentioned what the payback is going to be, how it's going to work. Are they going to demand it back in a year, which will then throw us into another Roosevelt recession, which happened about 4 to 5 years after the original recession because they tightened monetary policy. They took money back. Again, we don't know enough details on what this whole payroll tax deferment really is going to look like. However, we do know that the stock market is going to swing based upon Congress's action on PPP and unemployment. It's going to determine short-term swings. Again, all I can do is implore the congressmen and congress ladies to say, listen, let's take a page out of the 1929 crash playbook. And if you look at what's happening, you got Pelosi and Schumer on the Democratic side, and then you've got the Republicans, and they're both in the wrong. The Democrats are basically saying, we want you to come up with all this extra money, and every taxpayer in the United States should pay for the financial failure of these states like Illinois, like California, etc., New York. The states that have done a good job with finances should not have to pay for those failed states. On the flip side, the Republicans are being too darn conservative. Look at what happened in 1929. The Republicans on theirs, and Roosevelt for that matter, pulled back monetary policy. They increased interest rates, which reduced monetary flow, and they went into a secondary recession. They released the money, they started monetary flow, they lowered interest rate, and bam, they came out of the recession. Now, the reason that everybody says the 1929 recession, the depression, was 12 to 15 years, it wasn't 12 to 15 years. The government controlled a lot of that. The first couple of years were because of Hoover's failures. Then Roosevelt did the right thing and freed up monetary policy. But then when they restricted it, that took them out 2 years into another recession. So I just wish that Congress could step back and say, I know it's an election year, but look, we have human lives. We have U.S. citizens that can't afford to pay their bills. They have families at home with kids that have no money to feed their kids. Come on. You guys can afford to take a vacation, get back to work, figure something out that's fair. And while I would love to say take the election out of this and the political drama out of this, they're politicians. What do we expect? We have the paradigm shift. But the paradigm shift really has a lot to do with how life has changed. Well, last week I put in there life has changed with streaming entertainment, home offices, home delivery, food services, video services, and even residential and real estate is turned to residential cell towers, data storage versus the old brick and mortar retail and commercial real estate. Well, now here's the news this week. AMC Theaters to open 100 theaters by September 1st. And you know what your admission price is going to be? 15 cents. I said it, 15 cents. Now they're going to do they've done everything from social distancing, limited ticket sales, new ventilation systems, and ordering your snacks by app, right? So for all of you that have been fighting technology, boy, you better jump into it because the whole world is changing. And if you're not on the technology wagon, well, you're left off the wagon. Well, Walmart comes out. Now they say that they're going to open up 100 drive-in theaters to compete with traditional theaters. You have to order the tickets online, and really it's a great way to get the family out. It's going to be like going back to the 40s and 50s and drive-in theaters. It's completely safe, and at least you get a night out away from home. Well, let's look at the stock market indexes here ending 813. We're up about 3.3% on the S&P 500. If we look back at 2018, we were down 4.38. So considering everything that's happened this year so far, we're doing really good. I'm going to go back real quick because I'm still going to make this prediction that we're going to be at the Dow. The Dow will be at 30,000 by the end of the year. Now, again, I don't care who is going to be in office. I still think it's going to hit 30,000 before the end of the year. Now, if it hits 30,000, and then Biden gets in, I do believe it's going to have a big pullback. But that's not going to change my opinion on the danger of the election and what's going to happen with taxes. So the actions to take right now, change in investment direction. If you can't sit back and look at where people are spending money in the direction of how humans are changing, you have electric vehicles, you have shopping online, you have ordering food online, you have people working at home. These are all major, major paradigm shifts that should redirect your investment structure. Refinancing a home, I promised I'd tell you about this. There is a new rule that's going to be going into effect. It's a refinance risk fee. So get your refinance done as quick as you can. Sell your home if it's high. Listen, people will say, well, would you sell your home and rent? Of course, I've actually done it. Julie and I sold our houses back in 2007. We rented for a few years while the market was absolutely crashing. We bought another house back, sold that one. I'm never opposed to doing what's right financially. Prepare for that real estate buyback at the end of 2021. And for goodness sakes, get your trust restructured because under the Secure Act, we're in some big, big trouble. If you have an old trust and you have an IRA that you're going to try to protect assets passing down to family members, look for Social Security changes coming up. And here's the big one. Number one, I think everybody, if you ask me right now, am I that concerned about the virus and the vaccine? No. That is a mappable event. I believe that you can create an economic map, and based upon the virus and the release of that virus, you can create a variance or a tolerance and come within about 80% of what's going to happen to the economy if it was purely based upon the virus. However, what is the biggest risk and the biggest unknown? The election. So whatever happens with this election can make or break the next 3 to 5 years. So change in programming. Well, because I really see that there is an end to this entire economic turmoil based upon the vaccine, and the biggest risk that I see coming down the pike is really the election I'm going to change up the programming. We're going to change the name of the programming to Wiser Money Show, and it's really going to be focusing on people's money and how the election is going to change it and how income taxes will change people's financial future. With that in mind, I'm going to wrap it up for this Friday, the 14th. And if you have the need to give us a call because you would like a second opinion, your financial advisor is not using economic maps and they're kind of just going with the tides, give our office a call. It's 844-702-1040, 844-702-1040. Hey, have a great weekend.